Hey y'all, I don't know if you noticed, but earlier this month, a new social media app was launched. It's called Threads, and long story short, it's basically a Twitter clone. The interface and user interactions look and act just like Twitter, and while it's less than a month old, it already has over 10 million users on it, a number that's only continuing to grow. And that's pretty notable because Twitter, the site it's trying to replace, isn't doing so hot right now. And that's a big deal for the furry fandom because for the longest time, Twitter is where a lot of furries interact with each other online. So let's look into this. Let's take a look at what Threads is and what makes it so special, if it can actually replace furry Twitter, and even if it can, explore if we even want it to in the first place. All right, let's start with the basics. What the heck is Threads? Threads is a new app/social network that claims to be a friendlier place for online discussion. Or in other words, it wants to replace Twitter. And it acts exactly like Twitter and looks like it too, just with a little bit of Instagram flavor to it. Which makes sense because Threads was created by Meta, the company that also owns Instagram and Facebook. But a new app trying to clone Twitter isn't all that newsworthy on its own. There's been a bunch of other sites, both new and old, that have tried to position themselves as replacements for Twitter. There's a number of them out there, but the two popular ones that I've seen amongst the furry fandom specifically are Blue Sky and Mastodon. Now, I won't go into too much detail about either of those specifically, but interestingly enough, Threads brings in the best features of both of those alternatives and puts their own spin on it. The killer feature of Blue Sky is that it looks exactly like Twitter. And I mean, exactly. And Threads attempts to do the same thing. All the main features of Twitter, including making posts, liking, commenting, and resharing them, are all present on Threads as well. And on the Mastodon side, its biggest selling point is a much more abstract idea of decentralized social media. That alone deserves a video on its own, but the main premise is that Mastodon works by not being tied to one platform, but by making connections with many different Mastodon servers, each with their own set of rules and users. This is all done through a fancy web standard called ActivityPub, and dare I say, surprisingly enough, Threads is also planning on supporting ActivityPub, which means if things go as planned, Threads could potentially be the largest server that could interact with other people on Mastodon. But with all that being said, neither of those is what makes Threads stand out from all the other Twitter alternatives, and why I found it worth making a video on it in the first place. To me, Threads is special because it came out with the most important part of any social media platform: the people. Remember how I said that Threads was made by the same people who own Instagram, right? Well, Threads has a direct connection to Instagram, meaning when you go to sign up, you can port all of your Instagram data into your new Threads account, including your username. This means signing up for Threads takes literally seconds and is a whole lot simpler than waiting for an invite code or trying to figure out what server to start your account on. And because of that tight connection with Instagram, all of your friends who you follow on Instagram come over to Threads as well, meaning you could start interacting with the online community you already know, instead of trying to find everyone's username and building your follower base back up. This allowed Threads to gain over 10 million users in less than a month, making it the fastest growing app ever. That is also why I think it has a unique opportunity to actually replace Twitter, especially for furries. Now, it's definitely not going to do that overnight, but I mean, let's call it like it is. Twitter is not in a good spot right now. Ever since it was bought by a certain billionaire who fired a bunch of the staff, it turned into a haven for hate speech, a place where you can literally buy preferential treatment, and sometimes straight up doesn't work. And that's just Twitter as a whole. Even when Twitter was working, it's not like furry Twitter was this shining place of peace and prosperity on the internet. If you have spent any amount of time on there, then you know that furry Twitter can get toxic real fast. And that's not to say that sometimes it isn't warranted, but for the most part, from the call-out posts to the clout chasing to the wheel of furry discourse of topics that are literally a waste of time arguing about, I don't think it's too far-fetched to say that furry Twitter shows the worst of the furry fandom, more often than not. Which in many ways is a bit unfortunate because while still sucking in many ways, Twitter is still quite an important place on the internet for furries as a whole. Now, there are many places to talk with and hang out with furries, highlighted by places like Discord and Telegram. But if you want a public space to find furries you might have never seen before and make new friends in this fandom, Twitter is still one of the best places to do that online. Twitter is also an important tool for artists in the fandom. Other than the dealer's den at a con, the best way to get art in front of as many eyeballs as possible in this fandom is through Twitter. Now, it's not perfect by any means, but the Twitter algorithm can really help bring a lot of the talent in this fandom into the spotlight, and it is still the only place where I have found and commissioned artists for art of my Sona. Heck, now that I'm thinking about it, I don't have this fursuit without Twitter. I only found my maker through a recommendation from someone I followed on Twitter, and I only knew when they were open for commissions through their announcements on Twitter as well. And while that same algorithm rewards negativity, there is still a lot of good content from the fandom that is posted on Twitter as well. Friday is now my favorite day of the week because of everyone who posts pictures of their fursuits on Fursuit Friday. There have also been many campaigns for good that only got the spread they got because of Twitter. And not for nothing, there are some really funny people in this fandom, some of whose tweets have made me laugh out loud on multiple occasions. So while there's a lot not to like about furry Twitter specifically, it remains a bit of a necessary evil for a lot of people in the fandom, which is why many furries have stuck it out there, despite the site now starting to collapse on itself. But another big reason why furries have stayed on Twitter is because there hasn't been really a truly solid replacement for it. That is, until Threads, at least in my opinion. I've been lurking on Threads for a while now, and I'm pleasantly surprised by how fast furry Threads has become a thing. There are a bunch of artists and cool fursuiters on there, and most importantly, there are both new and familiar faces on there that are treating it just like Twitter. But because the critical mass of furries hasn't moved over yet, the conversations and interactions I've seen and had personally on there have all been quite pleasant. There's a sense of quirkiness and novelty to it that actually reminds me a lot of Twitter back in around 2014, where people are just talking about their day and posting the occasional meme or two. It's quite a nice place there if I'm honest, mainly because the community there is so tightly knit. But even though it's nice now, there's no telling that it will stay that way. And if more and more people start migrating from Twitter to Threads, won't that just put us all back to square one with the same problems that we had on Twitter, just on a different platform? Well, if I'm honest, there's technically nothing stopping that from happening, except for the fandom itself. Let me explain. The real reason why I'm maybe a bit more excited about Threads than the average furry is because it offers the fandom an exceedingly rare opportunity. We are starting to see the downsides of only having a few extremely centralized social media apps, and while it's not there yet, Threads offers the furry fandom an entry into thinking about social media completely differently. There's a lot of good that could come out of decentralizing social media, which allows for things like true verification, better moderation tools, and spaces where furry artists can talk directly to their potential customers. But even with all that abstract thinking aside, what Threads offers the furry fandom now is a chance to start over. We have a real chance to look at all the things that made furry Twitter so insufferable and choose not to allow it on furry Threads. We can get back to the main purpose of social media, to meet and interact with new people in this fandom and have conversations without tearing each other down. Now, even I admit that we're still a pretty long way from that, especially on Threads. In fact, if I were to describe Threads from just an application perspective, I would call it unfinished. It's still missing a lot of important features that social media sites these days should already have, like a following feed where you only see the posts of people you follow, better search and hashtags. Heck, there aren't even DMs on there yet. Plus, it's still owned by Meta, meaning it asks for a lot of your data. And if you're coming over from Twitter, you're basically swapping sites owned by one excessively wealthy billionaire for another. Also, not for nothing, NSFW material isn't nearly as okay on Threads as it is on Twitter, which is probably going to keep a lot of you on Twitter for as long as possible. But also on the other hand, Threads isn't being built by a couple of people in their basement. There are real engineers that are working on improving its features and stability, and the company has made it clear that they are in it for the long run. So we'll see, maybe Threads is where furries end up once Twitter is done burning itself to the ground. Or Twitter could have a miraculous comeback and render this video completely useless. Or who knows, maybe we'll just end up posting on Tumblr again. Now, that was the golden age of the internet. Anyways, that's been it. Thank you for watching. You can follow me on Threads @FinnThePanther, and I'm going to be posting and interacting a lot more there. I'll catch you in the next one, but until then, stay wild out there. Peace.